Hello guys, Art-Teeves here. In this short video, I'll continue my 3ds Max flower improvisation series and show you a couple of easy ways to create low-poly flowers for indie games. Let's get started. This process isn't unique, but the cool thing about it is that it doesn't require you to be great with textures. Of course, this pipeline isn't particularly relevant for people who can create beautiful 2D textures or draw flower in Krita, Photoshop or similar programs. In the latter case, it makes sense to draw the flower on a circular plane and then paint its roots or leaves on another, simply layering them on top of each other. The method I propose, on the other hand, is better suited for those who find modeling easier than drawing. In this case, we don't need any programs other than 3ds Max and Substance Painter. We can also use Realism UV for unwrapping. Previously, we had to create a cutout or opacity map in Photoshop, but now it's generated in Substance Painter. You just need to switch the shader and add the generated opacity map as a fill layer. However, let's proceed step by step. In this video, I'll show you two flowers, a simple exobiology one which only has 65 polygons, and a more advanced one that has 400 polygons, which in fact might be some kind of an overkill. First I create the central part of the flower. At this stage, polygon efficiency isn't a priority. Even if the poly count reaches millions, it's not a concern. The key is to keep the flower relatively flat. Volume will be added later, after baking, but for now we maintain a structure similar to a T-pose in character modeling. This flower isn't being designed for an indie game or as a final product, so I'm focusing on demonstrating the core principles. You can invest more time in your flower, breaking symmetry, adding irregular branches, or other details for uniqueness. If you want, you can always send your model to Blender or ZBrush and sculpt over the high poly version, making sure it remains almost flat. To flatten the flower while preserving its volume, the best approach is to use the FFD 4x4 modifier in 3ds Max. Scale only the top and bottom vertices of the lattice down, ensuring the middle part retains its original shape. Since we'll be baking our figures to flat surfaces, we should maximize the use of available UV space, ensuring it's fully covered with roots or branches. Avoid creating elements that are significantly higher or lower than the average topology. Similarly, keep the thickness of roots and branches consistent, tapering them only slightly to prevent issues during baking. Remember that many details may not be noticeable if the flowers are not viewed up close, depending on the scene you are working on. If your roots are sparse, consider baking them onto separate bendable planes, as I did with my long, sharp, dark roots. These polygons need sufficient supporting edge loops to allow bending. You can bake a single root onto a polygon, then duplicate that polygon multiple times, bending and rescaling the copies as needed. I perform some manual topology fixes when creating the middle part of the flower, as I use the symmetry tool. Since I rely on 5 elements facing different directions, I rotate the mirror by 36 degrees. However, such symmetry can look unnatural, so modeling by hand and breaking symmetry wherever possible is a better approach. Also, pay attention to your shading. Many artifacts may disappear with Turbo Smooth, but it's still important to keep the topology clean and organized. You can also apply the automated retopology at some point, especially if you ignore my symmetry method and rely on manual modeling and Problin tool instead. I add side tendrils to the flower using the Loft tool. I define each tendril's curve with splines, setting all vertices to smooth. Then I configure the loft curve. I create initial circles for my lofts from cylinders, ensuring they have the same number of sides as their surrounding geometry. Next I deform them using the FFD 4x4 modifier and bridge the tendrils to the flower's central part. If you use too many sides as I did, you can select every other edge and delete them. Once I'm satisfied with the flower's thickness, I give it a few iterations of Turbo Smooth, nothing special about it. I create a separate sharp root as a loft object. This forms a second layer of our flower extending outward from the main circular shape, to which the roots will be baked. Technically, we bake a single root onto a plane with additional supporting edges, then duplicate and bend the plane's segments as needed. For a more conventional flower, use 3 circular planes, one bent inward to represent the flower and its petals. a nearly flat central plane for leaves, and a final plane bent towards the ground to depict the roots. The flower I'm creating might benefit from a third layer to add depth and reduce its flat appearance. However, I appreciate how it spreads along the ground. Next, I create low poly versions of the flower and its root using simple planes. There isn't much to say about unwrapping at this stage, since we simply unwrap two planes. The only thing to consider is to utilize the maximum of your available UV space and don't position UV chucks too close to each other. The rotation angle doesn't matter. Finally, I bake my high poly model onto my low poly one in Substance Painter. I set the highest possible amount of rays on all tabs, write proper suffixes to match high poly and low poly elements, set my subsampling to 16 and enable the opacity channel. You don't have to use Photoshop at all like we did before to create alpha. Next we go to the shader set settings menu and switch our shader to PBR Metal Rough with alpha blending. We also want to enable the opacity channel for our model. Next we create a fill layer and only use its opacity channel to fill our model with the opacity map generated by baking. If you have some hand painting skills, it's probably better to skip using Normal's map entirely. Maybe you can also exclude the roughness map, because you can simply paint everything you want to paint. If you want to texture stuff with grunges, you can always switch the projection method to spherical. This way you'll get the effect like the one I've used for a different flower in my previous video. You can move the sphere when you select the mask you've applied. The rest is up to you. Make sure to experiment with gradients and grunges affecting edges, and probably add some ambient occlusion. If you want to use normals, you can reduce the height of the fill layer you use and play around with its styling the way I did in the video. Finally, make sure to alter your environment settings now and then to see how the lighting affects your model in different weather conditions. For this particular video, I've used the single freeze matte material I took from Fred Taylor's ArtStation page. His YouTube channel is named Stylized Craft. In fact, it is really good. This material is pretty convenient. You don't have to assign gradients, edge highlights and other stuff like that. After I'm satisfied with my results in Substance Painter, I go to 3ds Max and assemble my flower. I merge it into a single object, put its pivot point to the center of its bottom part and position it to 000 scene coordinates. What I really like about this method is the fact that you can experiment with many parameters instead of just using polygon modeling or sculpting. Loft seems like a really convenient tool to generate some initial geometry that can be altered the way you like. If you still want to sculpt over it, you can obviously do that in software you prefer. The second flower received significantly more polygons. Overall, I wouldn't particularly want to use it in projects, because it doesn't justify our costs with its exceptional beauty. Each of the bells has 9 sides, and considering the horizontal edge loop, that totals 18 sides. Overkill, given that it could have been 5 or 10 with the bend caused by an extra edge loop. Can you count these sides if the flower is placed at your character's feet? In general, yes, but in reality, hardly anyone would notice such details. Reducing the bell's sides to 5 would lower the total polygon count of all bells from 162 to 90. The stems were given 5 sides. Ideally, this is the maximum for low poly flowers. In practice, 3 or 4 sides look just as good, especially for truly small objects. The modeling principle is the same as for the first flower. Instead of drawing or sculpting buds, we simply model a basic design and bake it onto a low poly version tailored to its shape. Substance Painter automatically generates a cutout opacity map for us, and then we assemble the flower from existing objects, stems, buds and those tendril-like things growing from under the bells. If needed, we can always stretch copies of the bell with an FFD modifier, or tweak them after copying. There is no need to create different bud versions. Of course, we could bake not only cylindrical shapes, but also experiment with forms. For example, baking downward tendrils emerging from a single point on a stem. However, high detail on thin elements would require increasing the resolution of the transparency map. We aren't obliged to integrate the stems into the plant's central root base using propylene. We can always set a low poly hemisphere and make the stems intersect it. Either way, it's worth experimenting with the polygon count of each stem. 3 sides might not differ much from 5, saving about 20 polygons per stem, considering their overall bend. Like the pipeline we've used while modeling the first flower, I modeled just one tendril to hang from under the bells, baked it onto a plane, and then duplicated it, adding 3 tendrils under each bell except the bottom one. I gave each low poly plane used for baking the tendrils a supporting edge down the center, a pointless decision as the tendrils are quite thin and don't need extra volume. The tendrils and high poly bells received several turbo smooth iterations. Naturally, the fewer bends in our stems, the fewer supporting edge loops they need to ensure smoothness. We won't bake high poly stems onto low poly ones because we don't want to bake bells and stems separately. This decision is only justified if we want to speed up our pipeline. If we tried to make smooth stems using turbo smooth, my pipeline would result in transparent patches appearing on our low poly stems. As with texturing the first flower, we use a 1K as a texture map. The efficiency of the map heavily depends on how fully it's utilized. Ideally, we shall combine multiple plants into unified texture atlases to maximize the use of a 2K or 4K resolution map. Once again, I disable the ID tab, set subsampling to 16, enable the opacity tab, and switch the shader in the shader set settings menu. To ensure the cutout map functions optimally, the objects being cut out should occupy a significant portion of the overall texture map. In general, we can entirely forgo roughness and metalness maps by assigning these values directly in the renderer or a game engine. Additionally, there is no need to use an emission map. We can simply color the glowing flower elements in bright tones. The rest is done with masks. As I mentioned at the start of the video, hand-drawing flowers will almost always yield better results than my method, especially since it allows us to skip using a normal map entirely. However, the process I demonstrate in this video enables quick creation of background objects suitable for simple indie games. The process of assembling the second flower is no different from the first. I duplicate the elements I've textured and position them properly. Then I attach all elements to each other, merging them into a single flower. Finally, I set its pivot point to the bottom of its central part and move my plant to 000 seam coordinates. Thanks for watching, guys. If you like my videos, be my guest and subscribe to my channel for more stylized content. And most importantly, have a great day.